MarketPlace. My name is Celeste Mitchell. Today we're going to be discussing divorce and what to do with your home and your mortgage bond once you've been divorced. Joining me in studio is Mr. Mark Briggles, who is the owner of Remax Ultra Select, a franchisee of the Remax Property Group, which is the biggest real estate brand in the world. Welcome, Mark. Welcome, Patrick, who is an attorney.
From Jason Friel Attorneys.
Jason Friel Attorneys, awesome. Welcome, gentlemen, to MarketPlace. So, my first question to you is, Mark, currently over 20,000 couples get divorced in South Africa every single year. And obviously there's a lot of financial issues that come along with the divorce. These statistics are horrendous. So I just want to know, can you please explain what happens to the property when a couple gets divorced and what the procedure is?
Okay. Firstly, the more important than the financial issues is the emotional issues.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, the first thing people need to decide is, do they still want to live in the house? Is one of the parties wanting to live in the house? Do they feel secure there? Or is it actually an emotional nightmare for them to be there? So the first step would be, do they want to live there? And then the second important factor would be which matrimonial contract they've got. They could be married in community of property, they could be married antenuptial, or they could be married, antenuptial with accrual or antenuptial with no accrual. And I think Patrick will be able to explain that a bit more.
Yes, please, Patrick, do explain.
Well, in community of property is fairly straightforward. You have a joint estate where the spouses are 50% partners, if you want to use that term. And when you get divorced, the joint estate gets divided down the middle. Each spouse gets 50%. What this means for property, of course, is that each spouse becomes a half owner of the property. Mark will get back to that in a couple of seconds, I'm sure. Out of community of property, excluding accrual is also fairly straightforward. That's where the parties have executed an antenuptial contract that stipulates that each spouse will be liable for their own assets and liabilities. The last form you get is out of community of property incorporating accrual, which is a little bit more complicated. That's basically where the parties retain their respective estates, but when it comes to divorce, a court examines the value of each estate when they got married and when the divorce is. And the difference in growth between the two estates is then divided equally between the spouses.
Okay. So, Mark, can you please explain what options do the clients generally have?
Okay, there's basically 4 options. The first one being that they can sell the house now and divide the profits equally. Then the second one is they could buy out the spouse. The third option is your spouse could buy you out. And the fourth option would be that you retain the property and one of the spouses might still live in there, or you might rent it out and then hope for future capital gain and sell it at a later stage.
Okay. Can you please explain the financial implications of these scenarios?
Okay. Look, let's say you are wanting to buy your spouse out. The important thing is, if there is a mortgage bond on the property, the bank would need to release your spouse from that bond. In other words, let's say, in other words, you need to qualify on your salary alone for that full bond.
Okay.
And that is normally the issue, because most people are dependent on that second income to qualify for the second bond. So that would be probably the most important factor. Then, like I said, with the joint ownership, if you're retaining joint ownership, the advantage there is that, let's say, like now we're in a depressed market, in a few years' time that property might actually be worth much more than what it is today. But again it's going to need cooperation between the two parties. And what we find is that usually with divorce cases, I don't know if you get this, Patrick, but we find it all the time that people want to outdo the next one. Mm-hmm. They very seldom cooperate, and actually all that is doing is putting less money in their pocket. Is that what you find, Patrick?
Absolutely. It's been my experience that when divorces happen, they are more often than not very acrimonious. Each spouse, particularly if there's been some sort of infidelity or unhappiness for an extended period of time, the spouses tend to want to get back at each other. And as Mark rightly points out, this really in the long run doesn't serve either of them. I mean, when it comes to divorce, I think the most important thing that one should remember is to be practical and try and deal with it and get past that part of your life, get over it, so that you can move on as a person and maybe find happiness with someone else. But that being said, it does very often happen that divorces, when they become acrimonious and defended, end up taking months, if not years, to actually be finalized.
Okay. So, Mark and Patrick, what's the most important thing people should consider when getting divorced?
Okay. Look, just like Patrick was saying, being sensible, and then also a very important thing, if you are moving out of the property and you're leaving your spouse there, just remember that the bond is still in both your names, and the bank will hold both of you severally liable. In other words, just because you're living there does not mean that you are exempted from, or just because you're not living there, you're exempted from the bond payments. So you will be blacklisted, etc. So do make sure that that bond payment is paid. Don't just take your spouse's word for it, or your ex-spouse's word for it, because they could not be paying it.
Okay. And just a quick question, what happens if neither parties want to leave the house or sell the house?
That becomes a little bit more complicated. I mean, I've very often found that if that is the case, when neither party wants to leave the house, why are you getting divorced? But where you have a spouse who is being particularly stubborn and who wants to stay in the property, it seems likely that the other spouse would probably move out. I don't think there would be a very happy relationship if both parties who want to be divorced would want to live under the same roof together. But once that happens and you're sitting in a situation where the spouse who is staying in the property doesn't want to vacate, that makes things a little bit more complicated, because then not only once you've got your divorce order that each party becomes a co-owner of the house, you then have to go through a protracted process to actually try and get that spouse out, assuming that the house has to be sold, which very often happens in terms of the court order.
Okay. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure chatting to you, and I hope that everybody is informed and they received all the information that they need. This is Mr. Mark Briggles from Remax and Patrick from Jason Friel Attorneys. Thank you so much. You've been watching MarketPlace. My name is Celeste Mitchell. Do join us next time.